Hi, I'm Tom Donaldson, and welcome to the very first edition of NOFAS Now. It's a new regularly scheduled program that NOFAS has for you. Kathy Mitchell and I will be bringing you the latest news from the world of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. We'll pass along important research findings and initiatives, feature compelling people and stories, and take on the issues surrounding FASD.
With video, we can bring the experts themselves, their research, and people who live with FASD directly to you. I think that's what's most exciting about what NOFAS Now can do.
Earlier this month, NOFAS held a briefing on Capitol Hill to encourage support for new FASD legislation soon to be introduced by Senators Lisa Murkowski and Tim Johnson. The Advancing FASD Research, Prevention, and Services Act will reauthorize federal activities within the Department of Health and Human Services, and for the first time calls for the Departments of Education and Justice to establish FASD education and training for teachers, school administrators, law enforcement, court personnel, corrections officials, and other audiences within those two key systems. The ICC FASD, the Interagency Coordinating Committee on FASD, has just released a consensus statement recognizing alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, or ARND, in primary healthcare settings. Now, the statement describes ARND and how it can be diagnosed, how ARND can be differentiated from other disorders, and what prenatal alcohol exposure evidence is necessary for an ARND diagnosis. And new research from Drs. Ken Jones, Tina Chambers, and their colleagues that will be published in the April 2012 issue of Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research offers new details on how specific amounts of alcohol, specific patterns of drinking, such as binge drinking, and the timing of alcohol use during pregnancy can pose a risk. While this gives us more details on how and when the visible birth defects occur, the authors acknowledge more research is needed to understand the timing of neurodevelopmental effects. Last year, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism celebrated its 40th anniversary. From its beginning, the Institute has sponsored nearly all of the world's biomedical and behavioral research on alcohol and pregnancy. And one man, Ken Warren, has been behind it all. For 4 years now, the top man at NIAAA, Dr. Warren recently sat down with Kathy and me to talk about the latest scientific advancements and what the future holds for FASD research. Dr. Warren, welcome. We're thrilled to have you as our very first guest. Let's start out with the basics. NIAAA, tell us about it.
Well, NIAAA is the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. It was created by Congress in 1970. Its focus is and always has been on the health issues related to alcohol. It was around at the beginning of the recognition of fetal alcohol syndrome. NIAAA was there and had the mandate to be able to start to study the relationship of alcohol to pregnancy and pregnancy outcome.
And that mandate has continued to today?
That mandate has continued to today, and we are the institute that has spent and has committed resources to research on fetal alcohol syndrome, and over the years also on a number of outreach efforts, public education campaigns, some of which have been undertaken joint with NOFAS, and to other activities surrounding fetal alcohol syndrome. But our primary mission has been research and actually remains research. We spend about $33 million a year just on alcohol and pregnancy research at the current point in time.
At the current point in time. Now, we want to talk about some of the historical research and how it's evolved, but first, what are you doing now, the most recent and the current research with regards to FASD?
Okay, well, there are some very good interview instruments that are good at getting information. That's also another one of our health services agendas, which is to try to get all healthcare delivery people to use the appropriate questionnaires that elicit accurate information about drinking history.
With the idea being that if you can identify a woman who is drinking and has a problem with her drinking, right, then you can intervene and theoretically prevent
and
FAS.
Actually, we know in the case of fetal alcohol syndrome, you do not have to be alcohol dependent to have a child with FAS. Alcohol is a teratogen. Of all the drugs of abuse that people use, or drugs that can be abused, including tobacco, including many of the illicit substances, The one that poses the most serious risk for affecting pregnancy and pregnancy outcome is alcohol. And that's why it's so important to identify, and it's also the one which is the most prevalent. One of our goals is to identify new and improved biomarkers. Now, we have one very good biomarker right now. Alcohol passes very freely across the placenta into the fetus, and you form what's called a fatty acid ethyl ester. Those fatty acid ethyl esters cannot pass back across the placenta, so they accumulate with the fetus.
Forgive me for simplifying what you're saying.
Right.
I was going to say for our viewers, but really for myself. Then that's something that you could look at then at birth, right, and be able to say that they've been exposed to alcohol prenatally.
And you just hit the key word, because those fatty acid ethyl esters pass from the fetus after it's born, and the first passage from the intestinal system. The fatty acid ethyl esters are in there. You can measure it, and then you knew that this woman was drinking during pregnancy. But here is the problem. That does nothing to prevent drinking in that pregnancy that just occurred, because the child has already been born. Now, it is a very important marker, and we are using it, and we're using it in a number of studies right now. By identifying a woman who is drinking in the first pregnancy, it is a good indication for subsequent pregnancy that this woman is likely also to be drinking in those pregnancies. And we know that 70% of the women who have fetal alcohol syndrome, who have given birth to a child with fetal alcohol syndrome, will go on and give birth to another child. 77%. That identifies a very high-risk population. You know that this population is extremely high risk for future pregnancies. We need some better biomarkers that we can identify the current pregnancy and not the next pregnancy, and we're working on that.
So let's just back up a moment. Okay, so we still do here at NOFAS have women that are giving birth to children, and they are reporting that their physicians are actually telling them that as long as they drink moderately, whatever that is, that it would be safe. I believe there's an idea out there that physicians cannot be trained to appropriately counsel and question women. And maybe there's physicians out there that aren't comfortable with that. But I've always thought, then why don't we utilize addiction counselors, people that may be comfortable with talking to women, maybe trained nurses or medical technicians that can ask the questions that maybe some physicians aren't comfortable with. So the biomarkers are great, but I just think it is easier than some may think to train doctors.
I think to do nothing is wrong. If you are uncomfortable, then a physician should really try to find a person who can substitute for them for asking questions of this nature. But I think our experience has shown is that people can be trained to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Physicians ask many sensitive questions, and they have to for the health of their patients. And it should not be a sensitive issue to ask about drinking.
Every medical school or allied health program should be including this information, and as you know they don't, and training physicians on how to ask those questions. So that's my issue, because this is preventable. This is preventable.
It is this is the leading preventable cause of mental retardation in the United States.
Yes.
It makes logical sense, with alcohol as the leading birth defect with mental impairment and mental retardation, that any physician should be asking those questions.
Ken's a longtime friend of NOFAS. I first met him at a NOFAS open house in the early 1990s. I was struck by his knowledge and his passion about fetal alcohol syndrome. Without his background in birth defects and his determination, the field might be a decade behind where we are today. After all, it was his voice that convinced NIAAA to devote dollars to FAS-specific research.
Drinking while you're pregnant can give your baby brain damage and birth defects, learning disabilities too. Look, here's the deal. If you drink alcohol while you're pregnant, you may be ruining your baby's chances of ever having a normal life. All forms of alcohol are dangerous, even beer and wine. Yo, play it smart. Alcohol and pregnancy don't mix.
My mother drank 90 to 100 days during pregnancy. I have spina bifida occulta, scoliosis, submucous cleft palate. I have the overall brain development of an 11-year-old. Is one night of drinking, or one glass of wine with dinner, is it worth having a child like me, who has so many struggles in their day-to-day life, that it's actually worth having a little bit of alcohol?